Lewis Hamilton has been officially dismissed by Ferrari, meaning that once Formula One returns from the summer break, he will no longer be racing in red. But why was he fired? Who is set to replace him? And which team will Hamilton call his new home? Stay tuned until the very end, because the answers will shock you. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. In a twist that has rattled the very foundations of Formula One, the partnership between Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari has ended in a manner so abrupt, so explosive, that many are still struggling to comprehend how such a celebrated alliance could unravel in the blink of an eye. Just months ago, the unveiling of Hamilton in Ferrari red was heralded as one of the most monumental signings in the modern era. It was seen as a marriage of legends, the most successful driver of all time joining forces with the most iconic team in the history of the sport. The Tifosi dared to dream of championships, of a renaissance that would restore Ferrari to the top of the mountain. Now that dream has been shattered, replaced by the cold reality of a contract termination executed during the supposed stillness of the summer pause. What makes this implosion so dramatic is the speed and brutality of its collapse. The story that began with hope has dissolved into bitterness, and the whispers from inside Maranello paint a picture of growing cracks that widen with every passing weekend. Behind closed doors, tension mounted quietly, spreading like a storm cloud. The flashpoint came with the activation of a performance clause buried in Hamilton's deal, a safeguard Ferrari's legal team had insisted upon after watching other superstar arrivals flounder. The condition was merciless: accumulate a specified number of points by the mid-season break, or Ferrari would retain the right to sever ties. Hamilton, despite his legacy and his unparalleled resume, failed to hit that threshold. The statistics were unflinching: fewer points than Charles Leclerc, erratic qualifying sessions that often left him vulnerable in the pack, uncharacteristic mistakes under pressure, and the glaring absence of victories to justify the extraordinary investment Ferrari had made. But raw numbers tell only part of the story. What truly corroded the relationship was the cultural clash that unfolded in parallel with Hamilton's struggles on track. He had arrived in Maranello determined to reshape the team, to challenge traditions, to demand structural changes that he believed were necessary for Ferrari to compete with Red Bull and Mercedes at the highest level. He submitted reports detailing inefficiencies, he urged the leadership to modernize their communication systems, and he highlighted the flaws in how strategies were executed during critical moments. At first, some within the organization embraced his frankness, welcoming the perspective of a man who had lived inside a dynasty. Yet others, particularly those entrenched in Ferrari's traditions, bristled. To them, Hamilton was not a savior but a disruptor, someone unwilling to respect the institution's sacred ways. As the season progressed, the gap between vision and reality widened. Each missed podium added fuel to the internal fire, each strategic error created more frustration, and every point lost made the contractual clause loom larger. The breaking point came after Silverstone, a race Hamilton had hoped would reignite his campaign. Instead, the weekend unraveled with tire degradation, questionable calls from the pit wall, and a late misstep that cost him dearly. Executives in Maranello, already uneasy, began preparing for the worst. When the summer shutdown arrived, Ferrari invoked the clause with ruthless precision, cutting ties with the driver they once celebrated as the answer to their prayers. The decision has triggered a tidal wave of reaction across the Formula One landscape. Fans who had embraced the vision of Hamilton conquering in red feel stunned and betrayed, unable to process how a dream so bright could end in humiliation. Supporters flood social media with outrage, while others defend Ferrari's pragmatism, arguing that cold results leave no room for sentimentality. Analysts and pundits scramble to dissect every layer of the collapse, while rival teams observe with fascination, knowing that the fallout could reshape the entire driver market. Hamilton himself, according to sources close to him, feels devastated not only by the termination but by what he perceives as a lack of faith and patience. He has pointed out that building dominance takes time, that his first seasons at Mercedes were not instant triumphs but stepping stones to an era of supremacy. Yet Ferrari, unwilling to risk years of waiting, opted for the scalpel instead of endurance. The rupture has left him facing one of the most uncertain crossroads of his career. Retirement whispers are growing louder, but those who know his character believe he will not allow his journey to end under such a shadow. Possibilities swirl of a dramatic return to Mercedes, a sensational leap to Red Bull, or even a bold gamble with a team like Aston Martin. For Ferrari, the move is equally fraught with risk. They have cast aside the greatest driver of his generation in the hope of protecting themselves, but in doing so they have sparked a storm of controversy that could haunt them long after the season ends. The image of Hamilton in Ferrari red, once symbolic of destiny, is now a reminder of ambition undone by impatience, of a partnership destroyed before it ever had the chance to flourish. The paddock has rarely seen a split of this magnitude, and the aftershocks will ripple for months. This saga is not just a story of missed points and contractual clauses. It is about pride, culture, identity, and the unforgiving nature of a sport where even the greatest legends can find themselves discarded overnight. The scar of this failed alliance will remain etched into the history of both Hamilton and Ferrari, a tale of what might have been, and a warning that in Formula One, even the brightest promises can collapse into ashes with terrifying speed. Beneath the surface of results and statistics, there was a far more corrosive problem simmering inside Maranello, one that no stopwatch could measure. The much-publicized alliance between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, once promoted as a perfect fusion of Hamilton's seasoned mastery and Leclerc's youthful sharpness, was unraveling with alarming speed. What had been marketed as harmony quickly descended into rivalry, and what was supposed to elevate Ferrari instead left the garage fractured. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere was thick with tension. During post-session reviews, discussions that should have been focused on extracting performance from the car instead turned into battlegrounds. Leclerc, fiercely protective of the driving style that had shaped his identity at Ferrari, bristled each time Hamilton insisted on sweeping changes to setups. The alterations Hamilton demanded often clashed directly with Leclerc's preferences, and the engineers found themselves trapped between two contrasting philosophies, each backed by a driver unwilling to compromise. In practice, this meant weeks of development lost to endless recalibrations that tried to reconcile impossible demands. The frustration mounted. Leclerc, who had long carried the symbolic mantle of Ferrari's future, began to feel suffocated. To him, Hamilton's arrival was not bringing progress but creating instability, and whispers spread that he had gone directly to the highest executives to voice his discontent, accusing Hamilton of destabilizing the team instead of elevating it. If the partnership with Leclerc was strained, Hamilton's dealings with team principal Frédéric Vasseur soon became another flashpoint. At first, their relationship appeared constructive. Vasseur encouraged Hamilton's candid insights and even welcomed the infamous written reports that dissected Ferrari's internal culture and exposed systemic inefficiencies. Initially, these were seen as valuable, a catalyst for long-awaited reform. But as races passed and podiums remained elusive, those memos took on a darker tone. Senior voices inside Ferrari began to interpret them not as guidance, but as thinly veiled indictments. Instead of inspiration, they looked like blame. Instead of leadership, they resembled overreach. The very contributions that once marked Hamilton as a visionary were recast as attempts to usurp control. In hushed corridors and whispered conversations, the perception grew that Hamilton was acting as more than a driver, attempting to bend Ferrari's identity toward his own blueprint. Traditionalists bristled at the idea of someone in the cockpit trying to govern culture and management decisions. Meetings became increasingly uncomfortable. Accounts suggest that Hamilton openly questioned strategic calls during gatherings in front of junior engineers and mechanics, dismantling arguments with a bluntness that shocked the room. While at Mercedes such candor had been encouraged, at Ferrari it collided violently with an ingrained culture where authority flows from the top and criticism is rarely voiced in public. For Vasseur, already carrying the crushing expectations of Chairman John Elkann and the board, Hamilton's confrontational style was both a weapon and a liability. What had once felt like a partnership now resembled a test of authority. He grew visibly weary as Hamilton pressed harder, their exchanges escalating into visible clashes. The narrative of unity disintegrated as heated words flew in strategy briefings, Hamilton demanding accountability on the spot, Vasseur struggling to maintain command in front of his staff. To those watching, the principal no longer looked like a leader guiding Ferrari's revival, but a man fighting to keep hold of the reins against the force of a superstar determined to shape the team in his image. What should have been Ferrari's resurgence was rapidly becoming a battlefield defined by ego, power, and mistrust. Leclerc felt overshadowed, his voice eroded by a teammate who brought with him both immense influence and a relentless need for control. Hamilton, unwilling to compromise, pushed harder and louder, convinced that change required disruption. Vasseur, caught between appeasing his star signing and protecting the authority of the Scuderia's hierarchy, was stretched to breaking point. The dream of a united force capable of toppling Red Bull was reduced to fragments of ambition, scattered by conflict that only grew sharper with every passing weekend. The story that erupted around Spa has already been described as the moment that shattered the illusion of stability inside Ferrari's walls, the tipping point where patience gave way to calculation. Lewis Hamilton arrived in Belgium carrying the weight of expectation, determined to demonstrate that his move to Maranello was not a mistake but the start of a new chapter in his legendary career. Instead, what unfolded was a weekend that seemed cursed from start to finish. In qualifying, a critical error sent him spinning, compromising his starting position and setting the tone for what would become a lackluster race. On Sunday, the Ferrari looked unresponsive, and the result was a performance that left the team with fewer points than their projections had demanded. Outwardly, Ferrari attempted to frame the disappointment as part of a long-term process, but insiders claim the leadership saw it differently. In private, the verdict was swift. Hamilton was not fulfilling the contractual obligations written into the fine print of his deal. Data analysts, lawyers, and senior executives gathered, and a decision was made that would send shockwaves through the entire sport. At the onset of the summer break, Hamilton was summoned to Maranello. What he anticipated to be a debrief turned into a short, sharp confrontation that changed the course of his career. According to sources, the meeting barely stretched beyond half an hour. Papers were placed in front of him, terminating his agreement. The seven-time champion pushed back, his frustration boiling over as he accused the team of providing a car incapable of fighting at the level he had been promised when signing. His words were passionate, but they fell on unmoved ears. Ferrari's leadership responded with icy detachment, pointing to the explicit terms of the contract, citing performance clauses and hard numbers that, in their eyes, justified the decision. No room for negotiation, no space for sentiment, just a cold dismissal of a partnership that had once been hailed as historic. When Hamilton walked out through the factory gates, he was no longer a Ferrari driver. His tenure ended with shocking abruptness. The fallout was instant and explosive. News of the dismissal spread across social media in minutes, with commentators, fans, and rival teams scrambling to digest the development. Yet what truly transformed the narrative from scandal to legend were the whispers that surfaced within days. Barely 48 hours after leaving Ferrari, Hamilton was seen entering a discreet hotel in Monaco where Toto Wolf, his longtime confidant and former team principal, was staying. Eyewitnesses described their meeting as private, intense, and unusually long, sparking rumors that the two were already discussing the unthinkable, a return to Mercedes. The very idea sent shockwaves through the paddock. For years, Mercedes had signaled that its future revolved around George Russell, their young star, and the prodigy Andrea Kimi Antonelli, whose rise through the junior ranks has been described as meteoric. And yet, the chance to reunite with Hamilton, the man who had delivered so many titles, so many victories, and defined an era of dominance, was too extraordinary to ignore. The dynamic between Wolf and Hamilton has always been unique. It transcended the traditional team principal-driver relationship, rooted instead in a foundation of loyalty, trust, and mutual understanding forged during years of championship battles. To imagine them reunited is to imagine one final act of unfinished business, a closing chapter where Hamilton's career could end not in frustration or controversy, but with the team that shaped his greatest triumphs. For Wolf, the symbolism is powerful, the return of the champion who defined Mercedes' golden era, a chance to remind the world of the team's enduring ambition. For Hamilton, it is equally compelling, a chance to restore his legacy, to rewrite the narrative after the sting of Ferrari's rejection, and to finish on his own terms rather than as a casualty of contractual fine print. Speculation has already shifted into overdrive. Could Russell, fiercely competitive and determined to assert himself as the face of Mercedes, coexist once again with Hamilton, knowing the veteran's immense influence within the garage? Would Antonelli's carefully prepared path to Formula One be delayed or reshaped, sacrificed for the sake of a sensational reunion? Would Ferrari, having cut ties so abruptly, regret their decision if Hamilton returned to Mercedes and began winning once again? These questions now dominate conversations, podcasts, headlines, and late-night debates across the motorsport world. What makes this story so captivating is not only its unpredictability but its symbolism. Formula One is not just about speed or engineering, it is about power, politics, and human drama. The sight of Hamilton, cast aside in Maranello, only to be seen days later in deep discussion with a man who knows him better than any other team boss, feels almost cinematic. It is a reminder that careers are shaped as much by timing, loyalty, and personal bonds as by points and podiums. What once seemed impossible now feels tantalizingly plausible. Whether Hamilton truly rejoins Mercedes or whether the rumors dissolve into myth, the spectacle has already taken hold, fueling an atmosphere of anticipation that grips fans and insiders alike. The world is watching every move, every whisper, waiting for the next revelation in a saga that could redefine not only Hamilton's legacy but the very fabric of Formula One itself. Rumors in the Formula One paddock rarely die quietly, and the noise surrounding Lewis Hamilton's future has only grown louder as whispers of a dramatic return to Mercedes spread through every corner of the sport. Insiders suggest Toto Wolf is already exploring unconventional pathways to bring the seven-time champion back into the Silver Arrow's garage, even if only for a short stint. The most compelling scenario discussed is a one-year deal, a bridge arrangement designed to reunite Hamilton with Brackley at the perfect moment, while the team readies itself for the sweeping regulation overhaul in 2026 and simultaneously nurtures the growth of Kimi Antonelli, their highly regarded young prospect. For Mercedes, the logic behind such a move stretches far beyond pure performance metrics. The presence of Hamilton, even for a single campaign, would deliver an electric jolt of morale throughout the entire organization. Engineers who once celebrated victory after victory alongside him would feel that hunger return. Mechanics who endured the disappointment of recent struggles would suddenly find themselves reinvigorated by the sight of the sport's most decorated driver back in familiar colors. It would be as much a psychological reset as a competitive strategy. By the time Antonelli is ready to step into the spotlight full-time, Mercedes would already be re-energized and fortified, guided once more by the aura of a driver who redefined their golden era. For Hamilton, the implications are even more profound. His Ferrari adventure, launched with extraordinary fanfare, was supposed to echo Schumacher's legendary rebirth and ignite a story of redemption in red. Instead, it has fractured under the weight of internal politics, conflicting visions, and disappointing execution. A return to Mercedes would not simply be about chasing wins, it would be about reclaiming control of his own narrative. Rather than being remembered as a champion discarded in the twilight of his career, Hamilton would re-emerge as a man who chose his ending with precision. It would give him a platform to fight again with dignity, to prove his doubters wrong, and to leave Formula One not as a fading figure but as an enduring legend closing his chapter on his own terms. Meanwhile, in Maranello, the atmosphere is thick with turmoil and contradiction. Publicly, Ferrari has maintained its standard line, issuing a cold and carefully crafted statement that cited mutual agreement and differences in sporting vision. Those sterile words mask the storm raging behind the scenes. Major sponsors who committed immense financial resources to Hamilton's Ferrari project feel deceived, their marketing strategies suddenly reduced to ashes. Campaigns built around his presence, advertisements designed to link their brands to the image of Hamilton in red, and global events planned months in advance now look like empty investments. Anger has begun to spill into private boardrooms, where executives are reportedly demanding explanations and, in some cases, compensation. The Tifosi, Ferrari's loyal army of supporters, have reacted with raw emotion. Many had pinned their hopes on Hamilton as the man to finally restore Ferrari to its rightful place at the pinnacle of the sport. His arrival was seen as a chance to reawaken the glory of past decades, a vision of scarlet dominance reborn. Instead, what they have been handed feels like betrayal. Social media has turned into a battlefield, with hashtags denouncing the decision, calling it disgraceful, and demanding the resignation of those responsible. To the fans, the dream of seeing Hamilton lift a championship in red was not just a sporting wish but an emotional contract, and its collapse has left a scar that may not heal quickly. Inside Ferrari's headquarters, however, the mood is strangely conflicted. Beneath the noise of outrage, there exists a sense of cold relief. Charles Leclerc, who spent much of the partnership navigating an awkward hierarchy, now stands unchallenged as the face of the team's future. The balance of power, once blurred by Hamilton's presence, has crystallized. Leclerc is the uncontested leader, the driver around whom Ferrari will shape its destiny. For team principal Frédéric Vasseur, the split also brings clarity. By ending the partnership, he has reasserted his authority and signaled that the Scuderia will no longer bend its structure to accommodate even the most legendary of champions. Ferrari, for better or worse, will move forward with a unified vision rather than compromising to satisfy superstar demands. Yet questions remain unresolved. Ferrari may have restored internal order, but order does not always translate into results. Their car development has been erratic, their strategic decisions frequently criticized, and their capacity to execute under pressure has been inconsistent at best. Without Hamilton's experience, resilience, and star power, the team risks falling into the same traps that have plagued them for over a decade. What they have gained in stability, they may have lost in firepower, and time will tell whether the trade was worth the cost. As all of this unfolds, the rest of the grid watches closely. The possibility of Hamilton reuniting with Mercedes is not just a personal storyline. It could reshape the balance of power at the front of the field. His return would bring with it not only performance potential, but an aura that no other driver can replicate. For Mercedes, it would be a bridge to the future. For Hamilton, it would be redemption. For Ferrari, the aftermath of this split could either mark the beginning of a new, focused era with Leclerc at the helm or plunge them deeper into a cycle of instability and missed opportunity. The entire saga embodies why Formula One is more than a contest of speed. It is theater, it is politics, it is legacy. Hamilton's potential comeback with Mercedes represents defiance, a refusal to let others dictate his ending. Ferrari's fracture symbolizes the eternal struggle of a team that promises greatness yet so often collapses under its own contradictions. And as these two storylines crash against one another, the sport once again proves that every season is not only about the championship fight but about stories that define eras, reshape legends, and captivate millions. Lewis Hamilton's place among the immortals of Formula One is secure, but his present circumstances have thrown his future into a haze of uncertainty that no one anticipated. After years of rewriting the record books, after seasons spent turning impossible feats into routine accomplishments, he suddenly finds himself at a crossroads that feels as dramatic as any Grand Prix finish. His achievements cannot be erased. World championships collected with relentless precision, rivalries that defined eras, victories that shaped the culture of the sport itself. And yet, despite that untouchable legacy, the sudden rupture with Ferrari has left him in unfamiliar territory, vulnerable in a way that shocks both insiders and fans alike. Seeing him walk away from Maranello with his contract ripped apart, his pride wounded, and his destiny unclear has become the most startling moment in Formula One for years, the kind of spectacle that will be replayed in endless debates and dissected across every corner of the motorsport world. Attention now turns to the burning question of what path he will choose, and whether another team dares to seize this extraordinary opportunity. The possibility of a return to Mercedes has already ignited an inferno of speculation, a scenario that feels almost cinematic. The champion who once built an empire there, the driver who delivered them glory after glory, coming back to the place where his dominance became legend. But for Mercedes, this decision is fraught with complexity. Do they risk disturbing the balance they have carefully crafted, particularly with George Russell eager to establish himself as the undisputed leader of the team? Would Hamilton's presence reignite ambition and galvanize the factory, or would it create an internal power struggle that undermines their unity? The prospect of his return is as tempting as it is dangerous, and the debate rages on in whispers within boardrooms and in the heated speculation of commentators who understand the magnitude of the choice before them. Elsewhere on the grid, rival teams are watching the situation with an intensity rarely seen. Red Bull, Aston Martin, McLaren, even the soon-to-arrive Audi project, each of them recognizes the value that Hamilton brings not only in terms of raw performance, but in marketing power, in global influence, in the way his name alone elevates a brand. To sign Hamilton is to gain far more than a driver. It is to acquire a symbol of greatness, a figure who brings confidence and legitimacy with every lap he turns. The allure of adding such a titan to their ranks is almost irresistible, and behind closed doors, strategies are being discussed, contracts drafted, and opportunities weighed. For Hamilton, this attention must be both flattering and suffocating, as every option carries monumental implications for the next stage of his career. And looming over all possibilities is the one outcome nobody wants to contemplate but everyone quietly acknowledges, that this brutal separation from Ferrari could nudge Hamilton closer to leaving the sport entirely. The thought of him stepping away, not in triumph but in disillusionment, would send shockwaves through Formula One. An exit under these circumstances would feel abrupt, almost cruel, a departure not on his own terms, but forced by circumstance. For the millions who have followed his every victory, who have celebrated his records, the idea of Hamilton fading from the grid without one final conquest is unbearable. For Formula One itself, it would be a loss of magnitude beyond measure, depriving the championship of a competitor whose presence elevates not only his own team but the entire spectacle. Ferrari's decision has already become a lightning rod for debate. Was this an act of courage, a bold declaration that no one, not even the greatest of champions, is beyond accountability? Or was it a disastrous error, a decision that will be judged as a catastrophic miscalculation for years to come? Did they rid themselves of a disruptive influence, or did they cast aside a visionary who could have rebuilt them from within? The questions will not be answered quickly, and every Grand Prix that follows will serve as a test case for whether Ferrari acted with wisdom or with hubris. For Hamilton, the summer break, normally a time of rest, analysis, and quiet recovery, has transformed into the most crucial turning point of his career. While others vacation and reflect, he stands at the center of a storm that refuses to calm. The next choice he makes could redefine not only his personal journey but the entire trajectory of the sport. A reunion with Mercedes would be an epic homecoming, filled with the promise of unfinished business and a shot at closing the circle on his story. A leap to another team would signal his refusal to be defined by Ferrari's rejection, a statement that he remains hungry enough to conquer new challenges. And stepping away altogether, though painful, would present its own form of defiance, an act of control in a world where so much lies beyond it. Formula One thrives on unpredictability, on storylines that captivate as much as overtakes and lap times. This upheaval has delivered a saga unlike any other, one that intertwines legacy, pride, ambition, and uncertainty in a way no scriptwriter could have imagined. The sight of Hamilton adrift, between endings and new beginnings, is more than just a twist in a season, it is a turning point for the sport itself. Whatever happens next, whether he drives in silver again, in new colors, or chooses to walk away, the repercussions will reverberate for years, shaping not just Hamilton's destiny but the very identity of Formula One in the modern era.